The ICC has issued a warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, and the world has gone insane. The US, in reaction to those warrants, is going to sanction the ICC because they're not happy with that decision. They've been calling it anti-Semitic, and a lot of people online are saying this is very anti-Semitic, which is very interesting. I wanted to go into that today to go over why did the ICC issue the warrant? Is there any evidence to support this? And are they anti-Semitic? Let's go into it. So what actually happened? Well, on Thursday, 21st of November of 2024, the ICC, for the first time, issued a warrant against a democratically elected leader. That was Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, and the defense minister, the former defense minister of Israel, Gallant. And with that, they also issued a warrant for the Hamas leader, one Hamas leader, which is Hamadiev. Why one Hamas leader? Well, because all the leaders of Hamas have been killed by Israel. And Israel actually says they've actually killed Hamadiev. But it's not been totally confirmed, and that's why they issued the warrant. Now, what does issuing the warrant means? Well, as we see over here, all 124 member states of the ICC are obligated by the court's founding statute to arrest and hand over any individual subject to an ICC arrest warrant if they set foot on their territory. Now, the court has no means of enforcing such arrests. It has no police force, so the arrest of suspects must be carried out by member state of the ICC. Now, most European countries are members of the ICC. What that means is that if they step in the UK or the Netherlands, then those authorities will arrest Bibi Netanyahu and send them to the ICC for investigation into the crimes that they have alleged that they've committed. Now, a lot of countries have said, we're not going to enforce this. So Hungary actually invited Netanyahu following the issue of the warrant, said, come over here, we're going to ignore this. The UK, Canada, Netherlands actually said if they do step in their territory, they will arrest them. The US is not party of the ICC, so they've just gone crazy and are actually going to sanction the ICC and the ICC judges and members in ways we're going to find out how. We're not sure yet. They will, I think, try to defund the ICC and break it down. Let's see how that plays. But a lot of people are saying, wait, how come the ICC is issuing these warrants against Bibi Netanyahu when they haven't issued warrants against, Bashar al-Assad, to what he's done to Syria, to his people, the Iranians, what they've done to their people, Turkey, what they've been doing to the Kurds? Well, the way the ICC works is that they focus on crimes committed in states that have signed up to the Rome Statute. And that's where the ICC's jurisdiction really lies. Iran, Turkey, Iraq, Syria, even Israel are not party to the Rome Statute, and therefore ICC doesn't have jurisdiction there. But the Palestinian territories are party to the Rome Statute, which means the ICC does have a remit to focus on what crimes have been committed there, and they can issue warrants for anyone anywhere in the world that have committed crimes in those states. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, Karim Khan, he is corrupt. Karim Khan, which is the prosecutor of the ICC, actually just presented the evidence, and it's not his evidence, it's the evidence he's collected from other places, independent bodies. We're going to go through that. And he's presented this to the judges who have judged based on the evidence that there's reasonable grounds that war crimes have been committed, and therefore they've issued the warrants, right? Who are those judges? Well, in the pretrial chamber, which is the first chamber, which actually issued the warrants, there are those 5 judges, but only 3 of them sat to make those judgments, and they unanimously decided that there are reasonable grounds for war crimes here. I'm not sure which one of those 3, but they're pretty much all European except Judge Green, who is from Africa. Now, what are the actual crimes? So the chamber considered, and this is the ICC chamber, considered that there are reasonable grounds to believe that both individuals, Bibi and Gallant, intentionally and knowingly deprived the civilian population in Gaza of objects indispensable to their survival, including food, water, medicine, and medical supplies, as well as fuel, and from at least 8 October 2023 to 20 May 2024. And why 20 May 2024 is because that's when the prosecutor, Karim Khan, presented the evidence that there have been crimes committed. And so the judges actually, I think, just looked at that period of time because that's when the prosecutor, Karim Khan, presented the evidence to them. So at least from that date to that date, 8 October is the day after 7 October, which is when the attacks happened. And just to clarify, I'm not going to go into what Hamas did and the evidence against them with respect to their war crimes, because it's not really a debate whether they committed war crimes. It's clear that they did commit war crimes. So I'm going to focus on this. So the chamber therefore found reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare. So this is, again, not a genocide claim. This is a war crime claim, which is different. Genocide is a legal term that is specific, has specific conditions. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about war crimes of starvation as a method of warfare. And starvation doesn't necessarily mean death. It could lead to death. The chamber found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the lack of food, water, electricity, and fuel, and specific medical supplies created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the death of civilians, including children, due to malnutrition and dehydration. And this is a big one. I remember when I read this ages ago, when I saw that this was happening, this actually, hit me hard. In addition, by intentionally limiting or preventing medical supplies and medicine from getting into Gaza, in particular anesthetics and anesthesia machines, the two, I remember hearing a lot about doctors. Doctors were forced to operate on wounded persons and carry out amputations, including on children, without anesthetics, and were forced to use inadequate and unsafe means to sedate patients, causing these persons extreme pain and suffering. And this amounts to crime against humanity of other inhumane acts. So this is where, this included children, by the way. Children there wasn't enough anesthetic, so they were doing amputations, they were doing operations without sedating. I can only imagine the extreme pain and suffering there. They also found that there's a crime against humanity of persecution was committed. This is grounds to believe that the population was targeted based on political or national grounds, i.e. they targeted the people because of either their politics or what nation they belong to. So there were actually 4 things that the ICC used as evidence. One, and the important thing here, and this is the difficult thing that these things have. The challenge is that they have to prove that starvation, for example, was used deliberately and as a method of warfare, rather than kind of like a byproduct of some kind of military strategy or an unfortunate consequence of conflict. Like there's a war and because of the war that happened, there was no way of providing these access to aid, instead of actually having a strategy that's deliberately making sure that aid doesn't come in, right? It's the intention that's important here. And that's what makes the biggest difference when we're having discussions about all the civilians killed. Do they have the intention of killing them, as opposed to they happen to be there? And it's kind of like the argument is, warfare, people die, right? It's a cost of war. It's unfortunate, versus actually there's a strategy to either harm, starve, or kill people. So what was the evidence used? The evidence was statements that were dictated by Israeli leaders, which showed intent, right? That's number one, evidence of statements, which actually occurred. I'm going to go through them. Some of them occurred at the beginning of the war. Humanitarian access restrictions. So they looked at documents, instances where the humanitarian aid was systematically blocked, right? Or restricted. They might have been open, but how much aid was coming in, there was a strategy of reducing that. That was kind of the second thing. The third thing they looked at was infrastructure destruction, right? What evidence are there of attacks on critical infrastructure for electricity, that's required for survival, water treatment plants, electricity generators, things like that. And they also looked at satellite imagery and independent reports of the damage, of what was actually happening, of those things. And they looked at other things, but those are the 4 main aspects for the evidence. Now, when we come to what did Israeli leaders say at the beginning of the war? Well, the energy minister Israel Katz says no electricity or water will be supplied to Gaza until those abducted during Hamas's shock onslaught are returned home. This is from the Times of Israel. He said humanitarian aid to Gaza? No electrical switch will be turned on, no water pump will be open, and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees are returned home. They actually use this as evidence to say, look, the leaders are actually saying they're not going to let humanitarian aid. Humanitarianism is for humanitarianism, and no one can preach morality to us. Pretty much saying that we're not dealing with humans, and therefore we change the way that we provide aid. And if you remember I saw a recording of this even when the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant came on TV and said there's going to be a complete siege of Israel. I've ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. Now, you could say you're fighting human animals, for example, with respect to Hamas, who did some awful, disgusting things on 7 October. But to close up everything where there's about 2.3 million people, of course, that shouldn't be allowed. And so they've indicated that, and there are many, I'm not going to go through all of them. They've indicated that the leaders of Israel came out and said they're going to do this. And they did it. So first of all is intentionality. It seems like there is an intention for that to happen because they said so themselves. So let's look at the kind of evidence we have so far of did the Israelis restrict or block aid coming into Gaza as they said they would. So just looking at the map over here, how does aid come in? Well, there's a couple of ways. There's the areas let's look at the time of this. This is 12th of October 2024. So at the beginning of the war, there weren't as many entry points for aid to come in. I think there was the Erez crossing. This was there from the beginning. And then there was the Rafah crossing. These were the main two crossings that allowed aid to come in. There's also the Kerem Shalom crossing over here. Gate 96, definitely a new crossing. And the Erez West crossing. So now there's a number of different crossings providing the aid across. Now, one thing I want to know over here, because in a lot of the evidence that I've seen where people are refuting the evidence, they're saying basically that, well, Israelis had the gates open. They were allowing aid to come in. It's not necessarily just about allowing the aid to come in. It's about how much aid was coming in. And even though this border on the Rafah, for example, is with Egypt, it's the Israelis who actually have to give final confirmation about what can be allowed in and how many trucks can be allowed in, because they have the final say with respect to inspection. So they could kind of add so much bureaucracy to the process that they delay the process of letting aid or a lot of aid coming in. So I was looking at this report. The U.S. government's two foremost authorities on humanitarian assistance concluded this spring that Israel has deliberately blocked deliveries of food and medicine into Gaza. The U.S. Agency for International Development delivered its assessment to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and their conclusion was explosive because U.S. law requires the government to cut off weapons shipments to countries that prevent the delivery of U.S.-backed humanitarian aid. Now, this is devastating for Israel because Israel has been largely dependent on American bombs and other weapons in Gaza since Hamas's October 7 attacks. And if you remember, the U.S. actually came out and said, you've got 30 days to change. They said that to Israel. You've got 30 days to change, or else we're going to restrict weapons sales to you. Now, if the U.S. is coming, the biggest ally of Israel, who have supported Israel and whatever Israel does, has come out and said, wait, we're looking at this and we're not happy and we're going to restrict arms sales to you at this time, that means there is evidence for sure that there is some restriction. So prior to this report, USAID has sent Blinken a detailed 7-page memo on Israel's conduct. The memo describes instances of Israeli interference with aid efforts, including killing aid workers, razing agriculture structures, bombing ambulances and hospitals, sitting on supply depots, and routinely turning away trucks full of medicine and food. And I remember there was a lot of evidence of these trucks kind of waiting on the border to be processed. And they weren't being processed mainly because when Israel bombed in the Rafah border, for example, Israel bombed the route out of that. And so they couldn't come out until that was repaired. But at the same time, they issue the certificates to allow the trucks to come in, even when it's on the Egypt border. So do they have the capability of restricting? Of course they have the capability. And it seems like independent reports are saying they actually also did that. So this report indicated that in February, the Israeli government had prohibited the transfer of flour, saying its recipient was the United Nations Palestinian branch that has been accused of having ties with Hamas. So Israel actually came out and said, we're prohibiting the transfer of flour because of this. Now, the UN has declared a famine in parts of Gaza. The world's leading independent panel of 8 experts found that nearly half of the Palestinians in the enclave are struggling with hunger. Healthcare workers are battling a lack of immunizations compounded by sanitation crisis. And last month, a little boy became Gaza's first confirmed case of polio in 25 years. USAID concluded that it's one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in the world. And just to kind of note here that they're also saying it acknowledges Hamas had played a role in the humanitarian crisis. Hamas also, there's clear evidence that it is looting the trucks that are coming in. But the problem we're facing is that we don't even have enough trucks coming in. Now, this report continues and says, as of early March 2024, at least 930 trucks full of food, medicine, and other supplies were stuck in Egypt, awaiting approval from the Israelis, according to the USAID's memo. The officials wrote that the Israeli government frequently blocks aid by imposing bureaucratic delays. The Israelis took weeks or months to respond to humanitarian groups that had submitted specific items to be approved for passage past government checkpoints. Israel would then often deny those submissions outright or accept them some days, but not others. The Israeli government doesn't provide justifications, issues blanket rejections, or cites arbitrary factors for the denial of certain items. In separate emails obtained by ProPublica, 8 officials identified items in trucks that were banned by the Israelis, including emergency shelter gear, solar lamps, cooking stoves, and desolation kits, because they were deemed dual use, which means Hamas could co-opt the materials. Some of the trucks that were turned away had also been carrying American-funded items like hygiene kits, the email show. In its memo to Blinken, USAID also cited numerous publicly reported incidents in which aid facilities and workers were hit by Israeli airstrikes, even sometimes after they had shared their locations with the IDF and received approval, a process known as deconfliction. The Israeli government has maintained that most of those incidents were mistakes. So the Israeli government saying, yeah, we did it. It's sorry, oops. Now, when we look at actually how much is entering here on the FT, the source is UNRWA, which a lot of people question. But if you look at other sources, from the UN, it corresponds to this essentially. In October, so little was coming in. So 500 is the pre-war average. This is 500 trucks a day, and lower estimate of what's needed. I think some agencies said that you need 1,500 lorries, trucks per day right now because of what's happened in terms of the aid that's required. And look how much is coming in per day. In some weeks, well, in some days, there is barely any trucks coming in, right? Even in November, February, there were so many days that no trucks was coming in. And even when they were allowing the trucks, it's below what is required as dictated by these agencies like Save the Children, Oxfam, Amnesty, that are on the ground that are dealing with those situations. And the fact that diseases are coming back now that they haven't seen in 25 years indicates that the situation is extremely bad. Looking at the Norwegian Refugee Council, they looked at data which showed that 83% of the required food aid does not make it into Gaza. The reduction means people in Gaza have gone from having an average of 2 meals a day to just 1 meal every other day. An estimated 50,000 children aged between 6 and 59 months urgently require treatment for malnutrition by the end of the year. 65% of insulin required and half of the required blood supply are not available in Gaza. only around 1,500 hospital beds in Gaza remain operational, compared to 3,500 beds in 2023. This is for a population of 2.3 million people that are in a state of war. 1.87 million people are in need of shelter because most of the homes are destroyed. I've actually spoken to a journalist that went there and said it is something apocalyptic from a movie. I'll link the conversation I had with him at the end of this video. And so because of all the homes being destroyed, they're all living in tents. Yet tents for around just 25,000 people have entered Gaza since May 2024. A record low average of 69 aid trucks per day entered Gaza in August 2024, compared to 500 per working day last year. But remember that 500 is to do pre-war, where some of the aid wasn't just food, it was also importing different things. But some agencies are saying we need even more than 500 because we are in a war state and people don't have the means or ways to harness their food. They're relying completely on aid because even their movement is restricted to particular areas that the IDF has said you're allowed to be in those areas only. This is from the BBC, indicating how many lorries are coming, again, 500 per day before the war. In October, complete blockade, pretty much, only 9 lorries per day. And you can say, okay, the first month of war, it was hectic, it was chaos. Understandably, there wasn't enough, but even following that, it was restricted. And you can see it actually peaking in April, but then going down further. And in October 24, there was only 30 lorries per day into Gaza. And that's actually when the Americans, or just before that, the Americans came out and said, yo, you need to change things immediately. And this was actually given by Anthony Blinken, who actually released this with someone else who is Jewish. And they issued a statement to the Israelis, which the Israelis said, we're not stopping any, we're letting truck aids in. See, we have videos of trucks coming in. But remember, it's not just about trucks, just allowing trucks to come in. It's how many trucks are allowed to come in and who has the ability to kind of dictate that number. It's Israel and Israel only that's allowed. So yes, Hamas is looting. There's a lot of evidence that it is. But even if they weren't looting, there's not enough coming in anyways. And that is a problem. And that seems like a policy from Israel based on a lot of these reports. So the evidence that there is an intention by the Israelis, one, to restrict humanitarian aid, seems to be available. Obviously, I didn't go through the detail of it, but there are a lot of independent reports from the U.S. That indicate that they have been doing that. They are capable and they are restricting those things. Now, when it comes to the infrastructure destruction, which was also part of the evidence for war crimes, they did hit electricity facilities. They did hit the water treatments. They did stop water coming in, and there's still water that they can leverage in Gaza, but it's dirty water. Most of it is dirty water. So the only main source of clean water comes from outside, and that was blocked by Israel. They did hit the electricity facilities, resulting in no electricity. Over here, this is from HRW. On October 7th, the Israeli government shut off the pipes that supply Gaza with water. It has since only resumed piping water to some parts of southern Gaza, while some water has entered via Egypt, but it's not reaching everyone and is not nearly enough to meet the needs of Gaza population, requiring many to rely on the local water supply. And according to the UN, however, more than 96% of the water supply in Gaza is unfit for human consumption. Wastewater and desalination facilities were shut down in mid-October due to fuel and electricity shortages and have been largely inoperable since, according to the Palestinian Water Authority. So, all in all, there has been restriction of aid, either through the Israelis not giving the authority for these trucks to pass through, because there is aid. It's not that there isn't enough aid. There's these trucks just waiting for them to have the inspections done to be allowed in. And it seems like the borders are capable of having more trucks come in because they were having 500 trucks per day pre-war. So they have the capability to let in 500 per day. But now sometimes they average on 9 trucks per day, based on what the Israelis think is appropriate. There's a lot of things that the Israelis will not allow in because they feel like Hamas may be able to use those things. They have dual consumption. There's no clean water. Diseases have increased. They're not able to immunize. They don't even have enough anesthetic, which means they're operating without local anesthesia, which I can only imagine how painful that is. So it's not unreasonable looking at how many trucks have entered, looking at what the Israelis have said, looking at the independent analysis from Norwegian, from US, from the region itself, indicating that the Israelis are restricting, are making it difficult for these drug aids to move in unnecessarily, intentionally, deliberately, and systematically. That it's not unreasonable to say they are restricting aid into the population. Even as recent as last month, the Israelis have come out and said that we want to restrict food and water into north of Gaza. So people either leave or starve to death. They've said it themselves. And obviously the international community is putting pressure on them to not apply that strategy. Now, I would love for someone to explain to me how it's anti-Semitic to say that you have committed war crimes. Here is the evidence. And we, separate independent judges, have looked at it and said, this looks like there's reasonable grounds that war crimes have been committed. Starvation was used as a weapon of war. Genuinely, I would love to know. I know that, you can argue that, Israel is defending itself and it's engaged in that warfare and it's a difficult situation. But even in warfare, there are rules. And it's clear that Hamas is not engaged in those rules for sure. I agree. But Hamas is considered as a terrorist organization, right? Israel is not at the level of Hamas. And Israel has much more capable weaponry and intelligence and capacity to achieve their objectives in much better ways. Just because they are, they're considered as defending themselves or because the leader is democratically elected, does that mean they cannot commit a crime? So I want to understand genuinely, if anyone understands why this is considered as anti-Semitic, the ICC is corrupt and anti-Semitic, please provide the comments in the comments. Please provide the evidence in the comment section. I would love to know more about why that is the case. Maybe people can argue maybe it's the wrong timing because Israel's still kind of eliminating what it considers as this threat. I can get the timing element, but the anti-Semitic element is just I just don't get it. Help me understand. Thank you very much.